That relates particularly to adaptation to life after coffee leaf rust. So we want folks to be trained on that. We're hoping that he's training the trainers. That event sold out very quickly, and that was a paid-for event. And we're also giving everyone the tools to complete that process to keep when they go home, and hopefully train members of their own community how to field graft. So the idea being that when leaf rust varietals that are resistant are available, folks can graft right in the field to get those producing sooner rather than later. So that'll be a process. We expect to have more of those. The demand has been huge for it, and it's just part of our mission at HCA. Couple announcements. Please visit the trade show next door. The silent auction ends at 1:30, so get your bids in. Some changes to the schedule. The dinner tonight at 6 p.m. will be at Ray's on the Bay. That's the restaurant down the other end of the resort. It's in the resort, the same place we were for the cocktail hour on Thursday. And we'll be presenting the HCA's first Lifetime Achievement Award along with Legislator of the Year Award. Our honored speaker will be Congressman Kai Kahele. There will be elections this afternoon. That's been moved up to 2:45. Farm Bureau won't be joining us. Their executive director has a bout of COVID. And if anyone's not feeling well, we have COVID tests back at the registration desk for free. Please help yourself and hope you test negative. Thank you to our sponsors, our gold sponsors, Badass Coffee of Hawaii, Big Island Energy, Gearmore, Gowan USA, Ka'umahi, Kona Brewing, KTA Superstores, RCIS, and WECO. This next speaker has been a long time in the making. We've been working with this company for some time, trying to create a relationship wherein we can trace the origins of coffee. It's the first, well, no, this may be the second of its kind. It's the first of its kind in Hawaii. The idea being that we'll be able to verify and authenticate where coffee is grown, and equally as important, maybe where it's not grown. So this will help with counterfeiting, integrity, trust, marketability for Hawaiian coffee. So we're very excited. Please join me, a warm welcome with Dr. Olya Shatova. She's a leader of market development with Oritain. Olya, please join us on stage.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Great. And I'm just going to try to figure out how this clicker works. No? Okay, thank you. Great. Thank you so much for having us. It's a true pleasure to be here. I really mean it. I mean, look outside. I know a lot of you live here. It's a beautiful place, and it's my first time in Hawaii, so pleasure to be here. It's the second time Oritain presents at the Hawaii Coffee Association in probably a 10-year history of our relationships with HCA. First time we presented in 2019. It seems like so many things happened since 2019. I mean, we've lived through pandemic and many other disturbances and changes, but we're excited about one particular change. It's our partnership with HCA that we have entered this year, and we will be creating origin fingerprints for the Hawaiian coffee. And today I will talk about our company, the technology that we use, and a little bit more about what we will do with HCA and the commercial partnerships we have and how different stakeholders can leverage our technology. I'm on stage, but I'm not here alone. I have my colleagues Mike and Isaac here at the front table, so if you have any questions following the presentations, we have a little booth in the other area. Please come by, ask questions. we will be more than happy to talk to you. So let's start from the start. And before we dive into any sort of technical detail, we wanted to show you this short video. It's gonna set the scene nicely, and I hope Justin will help me to play it now. No? Thumbs up?
If you want to manufacture, sell, or shop sustainably, then you need to know where your products and raw materials come from. That's what we do at Oritain. We're world leaders in using forensic science and statistics to prove where things come from. Because in order to achieve change, we have to hold each other accountable, and we can't have accountability without visibility. How do we do this? Our scientific traceability helps companies verify the origin of their products and raw materials, an essential first step in improving supply chain visibility and transparency, in protecting against the risks of product fraud, and of passing on those assurances to your consumers, all with added scientific proof. Our method is robust. It can even be used as evidence in a court of law. Powerful. We can verify anywhere from a country right down to a farm. And accurate. For example, for cotton products, we can test at any stage of the supply chain, from yarn to finished product, and can even detect blended product. Our process is 100% natural. We work with Mother Nature, not against her, testing what is already naturally there, rather than adding markers, tracer particles, barcodes, or data. We measure the elements a product absorbs from its environment, telling us exactly where it came from. And once you know where something comes from, you can be sure it's also free from the risk of forced labor, animal abuse, and environmental degradation. It's why we're proud to help companies meet the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, but always towards one overarching goal, and a cleaner, brighter, safer, and more sustainable future.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you so much. That's Oritain in a nutshell, and I'll expand on some of the points that were made in the video in my presentation in the next 30 minutes or so, and we'll leave some time for questions. How did Oritain happen? The reason we exist is to help companies protect their product and supply chain from fraud. We work in food, pharma, and fiber industries, and coffee, of course, is within our food sector, and we do know that there is a lot of fraud in the food sector. It's estimated that about 10% of the product, food product, is counterfeited. It's a huge number. It costs industry about $40 billion a year, one of the estimates. So big problem, and the businesses and the producers, they have realized that a long time ago and been looking for solutions that help them to tackle these issues. So we've been working with them on providing this solution. Something else has changed recently is that the consumers are becoming increasingly aware that what's on the packaging is not always what they get within the package, and they're starting to demand the change and starting to demand to know where exactly their product comes from. Some statistics say about 75% of consumers name a brand as one of the key purchasing drivers. So there is a push and pull for change, for real understanding of where the products come from, and for help tackling fraud and counterfeiting issues in global food supply chains. So our mission is to provide excellent product-based traceability that will help companies, brands, industries to tackle this issue. And our motto, if you want to know where something comes from, you need to test the product itself. And it's the main differentiating factor between our technology and the many other forms of traceability that involve paperwork, barcodes, labeling, and so on. We work with what naturally occurs in the product. We don't add anything to the product. A little bit about Oritain, where we were born. We were born in New Zealand, and I understand that some of you would have been here in 2019, so please bear with me while I go through the information that you potentially have heard. But I wanted to share a little bit about our story. We are a New Zealand-born company, founded by Professor Russell Frew, who is one of the world leaders in using stable isotope chemistry for origin verification. New Zealand is a gorgeous country, and it's famous for its exports of quality agricultural products, such as lamb, New Zealand lamb, manuka honey, and kiwi fruit. They're exporting it to many countries, particularly to China and other Asian countries, as well as Middle East. And the New Zealand itself is a brand that they realized there have been a lot of counterfeiting in those markets, and they wanted to protect it, so they asked Oritain to help with them. And they were our first clients, New Zealand beef and lamb producers, New Zealand apple producers, so we really started with agricultural food products, our journey back in New Zealand. Since then, we expanded. We now work in the pharmaceutical industry and in the fiber industry. In fact, our main revenue is from the fiber industry. We work with cotton, where there is a lot of blending issues and compliance issues that we're trying to solve. We have become global and international. I myself, I started in New Zealand many years ago working for Oritain, and I now live in London, where there is another big hub of Oritain. We also have offices in Washington, D.C., and Mike and Isaac are based in D.C., and a few satellite offices around the world. So we move closely to our clients to really understand the issues they're facing in their markets. Proud to say that the company has a gender split about 50-50, and among 130 staff, we probably have close to 40 nationalities now. So it's a really diverse and international company. It's really fun to work in this environment. So that's a little bit about Oritain in a nutshell. Before the technical part, just wanted to give a quick update what happened in the company since 2019 when we first saw each other in Honolulu, I believe. We have grown as a company. I think 2019 we were close to 30 staff, and now we are 130 and growing every day. And opened an office in DC. We are growing our lab network, so our analytical capability is continuously expanding. Our core analytical capability is still in New Zealand, where Professor Frew is based, and we have a big lab in New Zealand, but we're also partnering with other labs to make sure we can process samples faster. In terms of the coffee, we continue to collect samples around the world, pandemic, no pandemic, but we have collected and analyzed thousands more samples, and we have new origins in the database, including Honduras, Sumatra, and Rwanda. And this year we are mapping more samples from Brazil, and of course the Hawaiian coffee that we are really excited about. We have validated processing effects for coffee, so we can analyze roasted coffee against the fingerprint made out of green beans, and it's independent of the roaster as well. How do we do it? We use forensic science. It's not a new science. It's been used in really field of archaeology and ecology to begin with, where scientists used to trace the origin of artifacts and the migration of species using stable isotopes and trace elements, and they were able to identify where they come from. Since then, it was adopted in the forensic criminal investigations to trace the origin of artifacts or human remains and so on, and it's been successfully used in several high-profile cases. I just put a couple of examples on the slide. I don't know if you've heard of any of these cases, but the first one, the Pong Su ship, is is an Australian case when Australian government confiscated heroin from the ship in Australian waters, and they were able to trace this heroin to poppy seeds in North Korea, effectively implicating the government in drug trafficking. The second one, Operation Compass, is about the human remains. Unfortunately, a lot of this is around human remains, but they were able to trace, they found the body in England, and they were able to trace their journey of the persons through Europe back to Ukraine, and they were able to substantiate these observations using intelligence reports, and they used human hair to do that. So they split it up and analyzed stable isotope ratios in different sections of human hair. 1080, not as gruesome. My favorite, I think, out of many is 1080 is a poison that's used in New Zealand to control mammal pests, and all mammals in New Zealand are pests, in fact, but there are a lot of opponents to doing so. And Fonterra, New Zealand's largest dairy cooperative, got a threat letter where this poison, extremely toxic and lethal, was mixed with infant formula. They wanted to find out who did it, and they had a suspect who was related to a couple of production areas of 1080, and it's heavily regulated in New Zealand. And they asked Professor Russell Frew and the University of Otago, where he was based at the time, to help them, so they were able to separate the mix of infant formula and the poison, separate the poison out of it, and analyze the isotopes and elements in that poison and identify the origin of where it was produced. And those locations were indeed linked to the suspect. So that was sufficient for the police to implicate the suspect for, I think, 8 years in jail. I may be lying about it, maybe close to that. So the science is robust. It has been in the forensic field for years. We haven't created it, but we adapted it, and we've introduced a lot of innovations into it, including new statistical tools. We're applying technology, and we have developed a lot of IP in analyzing processed product. But it's used as an evidence in a court of law, and it's regularly accepted as an evidence in the court of law. In fact, when evidence like this is introduced to a court of law, the science is rarely questioned. What's questioned is the chain of custody, and that's evidence of where things have come from. So that's the science. How is it possible? It's mostly because plants and animals absorb chemical characteristics from the environment where they are grown or raised. We work with two types of chemical characteristics, primarily with trace elements and stable isotopes. The source of trace elements is primarily in soil, and the presentation this morning sets the scene really nicely, including different micronutrients like potassium, manganese, anything that you measure in soil or find on a shelf in the vitamin section in a shop, but also has some trace elements that are not needed, but they are there, like rare earth elements and so on. So because it relates to soil, it can change on very fine scale. Effectively, sometimes we see difference between two farms that are about 200 meters away, and we can separate them from each other. Stable isotopes are different from trace elements. They are the same element, but they can be heavier or light depending on the number of neutrons that are in the element, and it really depends on more weather features, climatic features, such as sunlight or precipitation, wind, temperature. So these parameters change on a larger scale, and this gives us additional power to look at regions that are regions or countries. We use one or another or both, depending on the product application, whether it's raw or processed, and we have developed a lot of IP in identifying what's more appropriate in any given point in time. Together, we call them an origin fingerprint. And the fingerprint, because it's just like human fingerprint, it's unique to the location, and we work with it just with human fingerprints. We create a database, and we compare the fingerprint of the product to the database. The slides talk a bit more about the process. So we have created the fingerprint, so what? A lot of work usually happens at the very start when we start working with a partner who wants to protect their product. We need to understand what the variability in that region is. So we need to go and collect samples from the region. For example, it's a farm or region. We identify how many samples we need, where they need to come from. We go out and collect them and then analyze them to identify their chemical characteristics. We then use statistical modeling that we have developed in-house and form the region fingerprints. We do a lot of quality and testing and investigations to identify what the performance is or how well we can differentiate between the different regions because there is uncertainty related to the statistical testing. We need to really understand, and we do a lot of testing to be able to do so. Once that's done, the database is ready and it can be tested against. What would like to note here that it's important to collect samples not only from the region of interest. For example, Hawaiian coffee, without a doubt, we'll go collect a lot of samples of Hawaiian coffee, but we also need samples of comparative regions that will allow us to really understand what non-Hawaiian coffee looks like in terms of its chemistry. And that's it. Then we are ready to go and do auditing in the market. We collect samples from various locations depending on the service or contract we have. It can be a producer, distribution center, retail. Our technology is very flexible and can be deployed at any stage in the supply chain. So we analyze the sample in exactly the same manner as we did it for the baseline, and then if the fingerprints match, the sample is consistent with its purported region, and if the region fingerprint is different, it means it's adulterated, it's not from that region, and this is the answers we provide to our clients. Our service doesn't end with providing reports. We usually provide a lot of support, understanding what it means for the production and for the risks in the supply chain. So we form very close partnerships to really support our clients in being able to get the value out of our service. How is this different from other traceability technologies I just mentioned? We don't rely on packaging or spray-on markers. We work with the product itself, and that's the main difference. Other traceability tools are extremely important. We don't say it's one or another, absolutely not. All are necessary. Our technology is, in a way, is a validation of other traceability tools people have in place, because it allows to validate whether the traceability really worked or not, because we go all the way to the initial origin of the product, skipping any intermediate steps. We often ask whether it's the same as DNA traceability. In fact, I'm sure there are lots of people who still think we do DNA. We don't do DNA. DNA is also a product test, so I think in a way it's similar, and there are some companies that do DNA fingerprinting, and DNA in essence is really about identifying the variety or sub-variety, species, and so on, but it doesn't really stop from propagating the same variety in a different location. Origin fingerprinting is different in essence that we are really about the location. We verify the provenance, and by proxy, we protect people who produce the product because it's related to the location. So we protect the origin, and therefore we protect the grower, while DNA protects the variety. And sometimes by proxy, it's used as an indication of origin as well. There are many other advantages, disadvantages. I won't go into detail because I think this is the main difference to understand about the DNA and the Oritain origin fingerprinting, because I know there are both in the market. So what about coffee? How do we apply all of this to coffee? This is our current map of countries that we have coffee samples from. Some have more, some have less, but we usually aim to get a comprehensive picture of what the biochemical origin fingerprint in that growing country looks like. You can see there are a lot of countries from a coffee belt that we have in our database, including Brazil, Peru, Mexico, Indonesia, Tanzania, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Papua New Guinea, and so on. We continue to grow it. It's one of the things that we do, or we pride ourselves that we do well in our business. We collect samples representative of the production area, and we use it to deliver our service. We can't wait to put the Hawaii in there, so hopefully next year we will present a new map. This is a different kind of map. In fact, when we talk about maps internally in the company, this is what we mean. And you're looking at the graphical representation of a statistical model that used to work with origin fingerprints. There are 4 countries on this map. It's not complete, just for clarity of representation. What you're looking at is every dot is an individual sample. And the relative position of the sample is determined by its chemical fingerprint, so it's multivariate. The closer the samples are together, the more similar is their fingerprint. The further apart they are, the more different are their fingerprints. And you see that they're clustered by different colors, and each color represents a country. So what you're looking at is really tells you that we have a capability to differentiate between different growing countries for coffee. Even though some regions seem to overlap and has 3-dimensional representation, they can be resolved in other dimensions, and we use actually many models to do origin verification. It's only one of them, and some of models don't actually have any graphical representation, but hopefully this will demonstrate what we use as a baseline. It's origins processed using statistical models, and we visualize them using this type of graphs. Very happy to answer any questions later on about this type of graphs, because I understand it can be quite new and a bit different to what you used to see, but this is what we use to deliver our service. We often ask how accurate can it be, or what scale can we work at, and the answer is that it's very flexible. Because of that combination of trace elements and isotopes that we employ, we can work at the country level, we can work at the region level or at the farm level, and we know that we can differentiate sometimes farms that are literally a couple 100 meters away from each other. It does affect how we sample and what kind of program we design, because if you're zooming in, you need to gain better resolution, so it affects how many samples we collect. Therefore, we need to understand what question we are solving or what questions we are answering before we design the program. But the science can be really, really powerful. As I mentioned, we can audit at any point in the supply chain, because the technology doesn't require any change in manufacturing process. It's flexible. It can be deployed at the farm, at the roaster, at the retail, anywhere where we know it's a risk area, and we want to help our clients to mitigate risk in that particular node of the supply chain. So it's very flexible. To sum up a little bit about the science, what we do is a product test. We measure what naturally exists in a product. We don't add anything to the product. We don't need to change the manufacturing process, so it's very flexible. It's been used as an evidence in the court of law. It meets the Daubert standard, so it has been used in litigation, and it's also commercially proven. We have adapted the science, and we use it commercially with a variety of clients solving different types of problems. It's scalable and flexible, so we know how to provide special programs designed to add the value to our clients. I think that's all about the science. Let's have a look a little bit on how it's going to look like in our pilot with the HCA this year. First of all, we will go out and collect samples from all coffee growing areas in Hawaii. It will coincide with the time of harvest, and we have identified the required number of samples and so on. What's most important for us at this stage is to really know where the samples come from. So we will require evidence of the location, such as geographical coordinates, and a robust chain of custody that will show us where the sample was collected, because we use that information to identify whether we've described the origin fingerprints sufficiently. We will fill out different chain of custodies. We also have a mobile app that samplers can use on the site, and they can take the geographical coordinates as they go and collect samples. They put them in a tamper-proof bags. Each bag has a barcode, so we can't mix them up. We know exactly where each sample comes from, and they can't be opened without noticing they're tamper-proof forensic bags. Thereafter, they will be shipped to New Zealand. I think we'll do analysis in New Zealand for this particular program because of the advanced capabilities we have there, and this advertisement of FedEx is not intended, so if FedEx is here, you're welcome. But once in New Zealand, samples will be assigned unique IDs, and then they will be registered in Oritain system for sample management. We have developed a bespoke system that will allow us to track the sample, assign analysis, and scientists can use it to upload results and do their modeling as well. So samples will be sent to the lab, and then there is a bit of work to do at the lab, but they will have to be prepared to be in a format that's easily processed. For the stable isotopes is really about grinding them into powder and putting them in tiny, teeny capsules that will go through the instrument. For the trace elements, samples are digested in acid, and the solution is analyzed. Then we get the data. The scientists in New Zealand will get the data, and they will process the data. They will analyze the quality, whether it meets our quality standards or not, and they will do the statistical modeling. As I said, we have a bespoke set of statistical tools that are put together and developed specifically for this purpose. They will build the origin fingerprints for the Hawaiian coffee, so hopefully we will be able to give you one of the spinny plots for the Hawaiian coffee, showing the fingerprints of different growing regions in the Hawaiian coffee to show that we can really differentiate between them. Worth noting, a part of this pilot is also R&D research into blending. We understand blending and coffee is very prevalent, and we can't see the future. We don't know what the outcome of it will be, but we believe we have a solution because we have done it in the past for other commodities. If you think of cotton, we have a really strong capability in cotton, and we have developed a capability to identify blending for commercially relevant problems. So we have expertise in-house, and we have approaches that should allow us to tease some of these problems apart. So will be all a part of the HCA report. Hopefully we'll be able to present it next time we speak. At the end of it, we'll provide a report, and we'll work together with HCA to understand how we can add value to HCA and its partners, growers, with the service that we provide. That's, in a nutshell, what we're going to do this year with the Hawaiian coffee. And now I just want to step back a little bit and look at the overall picture of why we work, why we do what we do, why we spend so much time running around collecting samples, creating fingerprints, and analyzing them. It's all about the impact we have in the world. We do believe that we have a mission to change the supply chains for better, to add transparency to the supply chains, to help people who want to do the right thing, to protect their brands and their product, and be able to verify it. We just spoke a lot about protecting provenance and verifying whether samples are consistent with claimed origins or not. But the impact of it goes beyond that. It's because by verifying where the sample comes from, you can actually verify whether it comes from the authorized area or not. And if you know what labor practices or environmental sustainability practices are used at that particular location, you can support those claims. And vice versa, if you can't prove where the product comes from, all the other claims around sustainability, water usage, labor practices cannot be supported either. So it's really important to be able to prove that the product comes from where it's meant to come from a farm, from a production facility, from production area. And in this way, we help our clients to reduce risk in their supply chains, to understand risk and make more informed decisions on their sourcing and risk mitigation practices. We work with many products. Effectively, anything that's grown or raised can be fingerprinted in the same way because its fingerprint will be related to the environment where it was grown or raised. And we work now with several ESG commodities or commodities that are particularly affected by environmental or societal issues, such as coffee, cocoa, palm, beef, soy, and leather, and so on. We're also getting into mineral space, and as I mentioned, we have a strong capability in fiber, cotton, wool, and so on. So many of the commodities that can be applied. The limit is imagination, and we're very excited about being able to provide this service to Hawaiian Coffee as well. It's really about what's in it for me, this slide, and I understand there is a lot of writing and it's quite small, so we won't stop too long, cautious a little bit about the time, but because our service really helps to verify the quality of the product, not the quality of the origin, and by proxy, the quality of the product. It has benefits for stakeholders across the company, from legal to marketing to sales to financial services. And if you are in one of those and you want to understand how does it help you, we'll be very happy to talk to you after this presentation, and Mike and Isaac will be as well. And just a quick mention of our partners. We work with close to 100 current clients, and the retention rate is more than 95%. Once we sign a client, we very rarely say goodbye, and we have multi-year contracts. And we believe it's because we have a very bespoke solution, and we really try to understand the problems that our clients are facing and design tailored solutions for those problems. So while the technology itself is, for us is of our own shelf, we apply it in a way that helps our clients to understand what risks they have in their supply chains. And we don't believe one size fits all, it doesn't. So by investing a lot of effort in understanding our clients' needs, we are able to create these long-lasting partnerships, and we're very, very happy to tell you about this. If you look at the slides, you'll see there are a lot of logos. Some of them you will know, some you will not, and this is just a subset of who we work with, and you'll see that it's a range. Some of these clients are world's largest multinational companies, such as Gap. Some of them are one of the largest consultants, Deloitte. Some of them are small boutique producers, such as Lewis Road Creamery from New Zealand, which is a small dairy producer of premium products in New Zealand. And you can also see Havoc Pork, which is a tiny, teeny organic pork farm next to Dunedin, and that's where Oritain was born. And they are one of our first clients. They're very small, but we are very proud that we help them to support their brand and help them to differentiate their brand from other commodities, from other farms that don't put as much effort in the welfare of their animals. Just a couple of slides about what our clients actually say about us. Meat Livestock Australia is an industry body, and its purpose is to foster the long-term prosperity of the Australian red meat industry, beef and lamb. They export to more than 100 countries. 60% of their meat is exported, and it's a premium product, and they approached us because of their wish to support their brand abroad. They know there is a lot of substitution, counterfeit, adulteration, and they wanted to be able to verify in market whether it's their product or not. In collaboration with them, we mapped the entire Australia for beef and lamb, and we're now in the process of doing a scan of their main export markets so they can verify whether the product is genuine or not and identify nodes that have more risk associated with them and that have less risk and so on. A2 is an innovator of Australia, and Australian, not intended to have all Australian brands. I just wanted to show you a couple of examples. A2 is revolutionized the infant formula. They use only A2 milk, and they created a very strong brand as an innovator, and they see Oritain as an integral part that allowed them to craft that story. With them, we have a long-lasting partnership. We verify their infant formula in their main export markets and domestically as well. It's largely around marketing, but for them it's also very important to be able to, at instant, verify the product, whether it's their own product or not, because cans of infant formula are often refilled, they're mixed. Sometimes it's not infant formula at all. We've seen instances when it's something like flour and so on. So they want to be able to easily verify whether it's their product or not and protect themselves from risk of adulteration and potential health hazards that come with it in the market. And what's more interesting about this partnership, and we have several clients that do it as well, they put Oritain logo, Oritain fingerprint mark on their product that allows them to communicate to the consumer that this product can be verified, that they take traceability seriously, and then they care about the origin of their product, that there is extra layer of protection around it. And we are now working on developing a logo with a QR code that can be scanned, and by scanning it you can learn a lot more about the testing, about the product itself and how the fingerprint's been created, and about the technology as well. So we don't have to be limited by the space on a pack. We can also, allow consumers to look online or anybody to look online. And I think that was it from me, and I don't know how I've done on time, but welcome any questions. Thank you. Yes? It depends, and that's why I said that the design of the program depends on the resolution we will be looking at. It depends on the substrate. It depends on the gradient and climate variables. If it's fairly uniform, it will be more not as dense. If it really changes a lot, and we can usually see it from just basic biogeochemical provencing maps and soil maps. We will have a more dense design. How many exactly, I can't tell you. It's probably in hundreds per region rather than in thousands, but how many exactly, hard to say. In terms of how far, it depends on the gradient, unfortunately, but hopefully we'll be able to present it once we go out and sample. Well, we'll sample in one go. We'll create, we usually sample in a grid-like format, so it's fairly uniform distance from sample to sample and approximates a grid. We will update the map. We want to make sure there is no significant change throughout time, and we know there is climate change and what's not, so we want to make sure we are up to date. So there is some small component of resampling if we want to keep the map alive for years to come. There are usually questions around the temporal changes. We've been doing this for 14 years now, and we've seen very little change in main agricultural products so far, so the fingerprints are stable. Sometimes we see changes with seasons, like wet season, dry season for rice, for example, are quite different in rice growing areas. But if it's a single season once a year, we see very rarely significant shift. However, we do account for it and we monitor for it. Mm-hmm. Thank you. It's a great question. The answer is it depends, and there is potential to leverage the fingerprint from one product to another. I'll give you an example of cotton and tomatoes. They are alternating crops, and if they are cellulose-based alternating crops, and the cellulose has similar fingerprint between tomatoes and cotton, so there is a potential to inform one map with another, but you won't be able to use all the chemical variables in this case. I'm not sure about coffee and macadamia, so please allow me to answer you next time we speak, but maybe. There will be differences, but there may be something we can use to inform one map with another. Can anyone? So we do it by proxy. We don't certify farms for being organic or non-organic, but we can tell whether it comes from a farm that's been certified to be organic. The organic certification is not part of what we do. There are some parameters that we can measure that gives you an idea, but it's quite complex and loose, so not part of our main business. We do it by proxy. We verify the location and whether this location is organic or conventional, it's a part of different story. Well, we'll go to farms because that's where it grows, but we would only collect a lot of sample from a single farm if you want to differentiate this farm from others. If we want to differentiate a region, then we will do a grid-like sampling within a region, not within the farm itself. But it can be either. The smaller you look, the more intense the sampling needs to become because you need to differentiate on a smaller scale, so we don't do it unless there is a question and somebody wants to support their claims about the product being single farm. Thank you. Yep. I'll repeat myself, it depends. In general, we're looking at true positive rates above 95 and true negative rates are above 80. We will disclose the performance we are able to achieve because it really will depend on the location and also the comparative data set, because you can only identify how well you can differentiate non-genuine samples based on the data set, the comparative data set that you have. You need to calculate how many of those samples you can differentiate, and that's why we spend a lot of time creating this global representation so we understand almost the entire production area to give a good idea how well we can differentiate those comparative samples. We usually disclose the performance rates in our capability report once we present the results of the testing, and that will be communicated with the HCA. Thank you. Yes?
I have a question. Does your technology work in the roasted state and the green state?
It does. It does. It does. It works on both roasted and green, and we can analyze roasted against the green. I think that's why I said the science we use is not new, but how we use it is new. We've spent a lot of time on this type of innovation to understand how to compare the fingerprints, how to relate one to another, and really tease apart these questions that are important to be able to make it work. Yeah.
What about a crop grown indoors and I find it controlled without soil?
Okay, it's possible. You mean hydroponics type of things? It's possible and actually a lot easier than in a natural environment in terms of how distinct the fingerprint becomes. But then there is a question, because you can change inputs and nutrients and so on, it will change. So for us to be able to fingerprint a hydroponic farm, we would need to work very closely with the grower to understand whether they change fertilizers and things like that. So it becomes a little bit more fiddly. And in fact, we've had some requests, but nobody really, it didn't take off, because usually smaller productions and less risk in supply chains, more vertically integrated. But it works, 100%. If it needs to be done, it can be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Olya. That was very interesting. Olya, Isaac, and Mark will be available. They have exhibitor space next door, so you can ask them all the questions you like. They've all traveled from great distances to be here, so we appreciate that. We'll be developing a sampling plan over the coming weeks, and we'll be rolling that out to all of you. Many of you will be contacted. It's a pretty broad, I've seen the sketches of it, and it's pretty broad. And as Olya said, the resolution is variable depending on how robust the database we choose to build. So we're not looking to do specific farms, although that is possible. We are looking for regions, which will be closely aligned with the growing regions already defined by Hawaii Department of Ag. So we'll be able to tell a Kona coffee from a Ka'u coffee, from a Maui coffee, from a Oahu coffee, from a Kauai coffee. So we're very excited about that. Thank you. Again, change to the schedule. 2:45 will be our elections and a subsequent board meeting to elect our officers. The dinner is at 6 p.m. at Ray's on the Bay. That's at the other end of the property. We'll be presenting HCA's first Lifetime Achievement Award and our second Legislator of the Year Award. And we'll have remarks from Congressman Kai Kahele. Want to thank the lunch coffee attributed to Maui Oma. Thank you. Delicious. Thank you, David.